Hello guys, I'm Jonathan and this is What Is This Weapon? Cheated slightly, we have two on the table already. The one I think we're going to try and catch you out with is this piece here, which is pretty unusual for this series and in firearms history in general. Although in the scheme of things, I mean this is clearly homemade or craft produced, whatever you'd like to call it. There's more of that going on even right now than you might be aware of. But normally on this series we show you factory made or perhaps more functional firearms than this. This is marginal on a technical level. So what are these? These are both artifacts of the Mau Mau. Well, there are different terms for this. It was known as the Kenyan Emergency to the British. 1950s, 1952 to 56. Mau Mau uprising, rebellion, there are various terms used. Ultimately, Kenya becomes independent from the British Empire. This is that the Mau Mau movement are formed in 1948, so quite a few years before the actual series of incidents that are written about in the history books that you're welcome to go and read about. We're interested in the weapons, of course. Really quite striking things. Now, the variety of these is immense. I've seen some at the Imperial War Museum. I've seen pictures of others. I've read descriptions of more. They are almost all unique, although there are some trends in the generics. You could probably classify them into different types. The most, I almost said realistic, because some of them are trying to copy factory-produced firearms. The Imperial War Museum have the best collection of these, and one of theirs is, at first glance, a short magazine Lee Enfield. But the more you look at it, the more you realise it's actually a sort of facsimile of a short magazine Lee Enfield. It is a firing firearm, in theory, and it's been very closely fashioned to look like the real thing. The two that we have are really not. They are generically gun-shaped, I think it's safe to say. Some of the more elaborate examples have a wooden block under the stock to represent a magazine. So it's non-functional, it's just there to look the part. And there's a strong theme here of the sort of latent power of a firearm, not its actual technical ability to project bullets at a given velocity or rate or whatever, but just the idea, the power of the idea of a firearm, which I think is quite fascinating. Now, obviously, if you can get factory-made or better homemade firearms for your sort of paramilitary movement, then you will. The similar thing happened with in the Troubles with the loyalist terrorists, less able to get functional weapons than the Provisional IRA, who had connections to do that. In the case of, or in this rather different scenario, the Mau Mau, if they can, they're getting the real thing, of course. But they are not sort of covertly manufacturing submachine guns in other factories, as happened in the Northern Ireland experience. They are fabricating things from scratch, by hand, almost in a traditional gun-making style, but, dare I say, without the sort of cultural tradition and technical ability to do that to the same standard as, say, a 17th century musket. You know, we have 17th century muskets just after the British Civil Wars, and they are rough. They have file marks all over them. They're clunky. The wood isn't very well finished. There had just been a war on. That sort of finesse is at a premium, but they are functionally the same as what was made at the beginning of that conflict. These are basic, I think it's fair to say. So this one is I guess a sort of 12 gauge equivalent bore of steel pipe, which is a good start for an improvised firearm, or a craft produced firearm. If it's the right sort of bore for a 12 gauge cartridge, or even if you're making your own ammunition, that might be a good way to go. Lower pressure rounds like shotgun rounds or 22 rounds, not only are they very plentiful in most parts of the world compared to other rounds, but they are low pressure, so less danger at the back here, which we're coming to. The stock itself is sort of quite hastily, quite roughly carved. We do have this hint here of a semi-pistol grip, such as you would get, on a factory-made shotgun or a handmade shotgun. There's no trigger or trigger guard on this. I'll come back to that in just a moment. The butt plate is, I believe, a sheet of scrap aluminium that has been hammered around the butt and nailed in place. Just some wood nails, I think. The barrel is secured by a barrel band akin to a well, not too far away from a bolt-action firearm of the sort that this is sort of copying end of the 19th century, with just a screw and a short bolt. Sorry, a screw and a short bolt and a nut, technically, I guess. Holding it together there. At the front, it's just a piece of twisted wire keeping the barrel in place. Now, at the back, this is where it gets interesting. So this is a bolt handle. Very sort of sinuous or convoluted, whatever you want to call it. Now, I think quite interestingly, this sits where your index finger might sit, and I suspect that's deliberate. So we lift that up and pull it back. So it's a very simple bolt action. The receiver, or the body in British terminology, is just a semi-tubular sheet of bent steel. So there's no sort of substantial pressure resisting lump of steel there that you would hope for a rifle cartridge at any rate. And if we keep pulling, the whole thing just comes out the back there. There's nothing to secure it in place. So that's your bolt with a, well, that's more of a bolt carrier or a shroud. The actual bolt is inside that. We'll come back to that in just a second. We can have a look in here. There's a smaller caliber sleeve acting as a chamber. So normally you would have the breech and then the chamber machined into it, slightly larger than the bore. Here we have a slightly smaller chamber inserted into a larger bore, if you see what I mean. And there's a little cutout there that is sort of ostensibly for an extractor maybe, but I don't think there's ever been one, so that might just be, yeah, I think that's just from the manufacturer of it actually, but it's kind of reminiscent of an extractor groove. And then just these notches to allow you to insert the bolt. So that is reducing the chamber down to, well, 303 case head diameter, or case diameter, not the rim. So that would fit and in theory fire, but that would be a very bad idea because this chamber is a plain diameter cylinder, and the case, this tapered case, would blow out. You'd lose a lot of pressure, which is probably a good thing because otherwise this is not sealed at the back, so it's going to cause you some serious injury, blow up the gun. It's not for 303. Now, interchangeable in some dimensions with 303, and sometimes 303 rifles were converted to this, is 410. 0.410 of an inch, or 0.41 if you prefer. Different measurement than the usual gauge or bore for shotgun rounds. Some of you will have come across this. So a relatively small shotgun round, that, well, I won't put it in there because I might struggle to get it out, but that does fit and would function potentially. But if we return to the firing mechanism, oh, sorry, there is obviously a cord sling or carrying strap with two iron staples holding it on there. So you can carry this around without having to just carry it freehand, free your hands up for other actions. So back to this thing. Within the sleeve is a spring-loaded bolt with a tapered, very, very robust, large conical firing pin there. So I think you get an idea of how this might function. Let's put it back in the gun and try and demonstrate gently, because I don't want to do any damage to this. There. So what I think is happening here is if we look at if we put that down as far as we can and look up here, it butts up against the breech, but the steel of the bolt sleeve is very thin and ragged, and the top of it is either blown out by a cartridge being fired or is just open there from the piece of metal that's been used. I'm not sure which. It looks like damage to me. either way, this is not obturated. This is not sealed. This was a big issue in the mid to late 19th, well, sorry, the mid 19th century. You had to seal the breech. The Dreiser needle gun, they had to come up with a way to seal the breech. There's the rubber washers used in the Chassepot to try and achieve that. And they would last a number of rounds and you'd have to replace them. By far the best way was to use the case head to expand and seal all the gas in. So it all goes that way. None of it goes this way, losing you power and velocity and risking your face from an explosion if too much happens too quickly. So this is a real problem for a design like this. How's it actually firing with no trigger? Well, and these both work in a similar way. If I pull that back and rest it on that surface there, that I believe would be your firing position. And then I won't let it fly forward, but with your thumb, you would knock that over to the left, flies forward, hits the primer, of course, on the base of the cartridge and fires the round. You would, I think, then you'd need to, well, hopefully you could get something in there, a knife or something to pull out the empty case and load another shot. If this hasn't given up, which sad to say it might have done if it had been used much more. This, I think, is, so you've got your thumb to fire, you've got your trigger finger to keep this as shut as possible, I think. Because the pressure's coming backwards, it's not coming upwards, so there shouldn't be any real danger of breaking a finger or anything by just keeping this held down. I think that's a functional design, it's just a whimsy or anything, that's to try and make this thing more functional. There are no sights. And no rifling. Nearly all of these are smoothbore. There are a couple of sort of salvage rifle or pistol barrels with rifling in them that were adapted into these weapons. And there were some, if the Mau Mau could get them, they would obviously use real guns, as I say. And I'm comfortable to call them real guns, factory made, something that will survive multiple shots with some degree of effect. The other one does have a sight, sort of. As it stands, the barrel band is installed sort of upside down. That may not be original to how it was carried, if indeed it was carried. There is a front sight created by cutting 2 grooves and folding up the barrel itself to act as a front sight. So at the moment, that's not much use because this is in the way. You could potentially have adapted that barrel band to serve as a rear sight. And maybe that might just have been the intent, because you can just see, I don't think the camera will pick it up, but through the gap you can just see it. Or maybe this has been distorted a bit, don't know. But minimal sighting. This one, action-wise, works the same way. It's a flick it out of the notch situation. The body is similarly rudimentary. And again, there is, now, interestingly, there seems to be a tin, I think, or some sort of, maybe it's a copper alloy. Copper alloy would make sense. Cap affixed to the rear of the breech there. That may be an attempt to affect that gas seal when it's locked. But there is still daylight between the cap and the front of the bolt. So I would not, don't try this at home, kids, essentially. Neither of these is safe to fire. This one has a trigger guard, currently being used as a sling loop, and there's a cutout in there, but it's blocked by something worryingly squidgy. I'm not sure what that is. Looks like rubber, almost. Anyway, I don't think there's ever been a trigger positioned in there, but some of them do have functioning trigger mechanisms. No butt plate on this one. But then there aren't on some historic firearms either. That's kind of it. Well, this is a shorter, lighter, slightly handier take on the design, but they're pretty similar. They're sort of 3/4 stocked, just different bores. This one is in theory, well, they're both, I think, 410 shotgun, but weirdly, this big one has a much bigger barrel, which means the shots just, it's going to form a pattern within the bore and then come out with, I don't know how much velocity. So these are pretty interesting things. This one has what I assume is a name, Kim, K-I-M, carved upside down into the stock. Possible this did have a butt plate originally, but I think that's just an old sling attachment, and then the slinger's snapped, and then that's how it's originally secured here. So it's just a strap of metal with some nails. That's how it was originally secured. It's snapped. It's then been it's just been tied onto the trigger guard. That could have been done by the authorities that received this, British authorities. And there's one other feature on this one, which is, again, carved into the wood, is KSA. K, logically Kenya. I don't know what this stands for. If anyone does, please let us know. And that's about it for our two examples, except for a label which was attached to one of them, which is barely legible. It's in this old plastic sleeve. I guess the key message is that it's a Kenya Police label, because these, in 1956, you had to hand all these in if you were one of the Mau Mau. So this would have been the evidence label attached to this piece. So it has station, and it's something like G5HQ. I can't quite make that out. Most of it's not filled out. Particulars of article, one homemade rifle. Well, technically not a rifle, but close enough. There's the name of the officer in charge of the case. There's no exhibit number on there, I don't think. Oh, there is something faint. Can't read it. And on the back it says wanted by, and there's a name. And the letter's SSP. Again, not sure of the significance of SSP. And it says do not remove from armoury. So clearly someone was interested in these as, well, an artefact of the conflict that they had presumably just taken part in themselves. By the way, this very simple pull it out against spring pressure, flick it out to fire it is very reminiscent of the old, well, everything from the 1950s, zip guns to other craft-produced firearms today made all around the world. It's a very straightforward way to get the spring pressure you need to focus that energy onto the primer. And really, the ammunition becomes the key piece of technology here. If you can fabricate something that will fire and contain the pressure of a round, you are sort of halfway there to a functioning firearm. I think the thing for me, or the fascinating thing for me with this sort of scenario is the Kikuyu tribe, forgive me if I've pronounced that incorrectly, from which the Mau Mau drew themselves, as it were, had access to, from my perspective, far better weapons than these. They had spears of different lengths, quite large spear-pointed, well, spears. The shorter ones, I don't know if they did this as part of their fighting style at any point, but they could have been thrown. That would give you more range and a lot more killing power than anything like this. The longer spears give you reach. I mean, there's every chance of missing or not killing somebody with a weapon like this at very close range. So if it was me, I'd be wanting one of the spears. Bows, they had very capable bows, obviously with arrows to shoot from them. So if we were just talking about combat effectiveness, the Mau Mau would have been fighting the British and those elements of Kenyan society that were working with the British, which they also attacked and fought, with bows and spears. And perhaps they did use those, but regardless, they made and cared for and cared about these things. And I think that's very interesting. And when you think they're up against, you know, a load of World War II era British firearms, Lee Enfield rifles, Brens, Stens, Vickers guns, pretty terrifying to be going up against that kind of hardware with something that might fire one shot, frankly, if you're lucky. So extremely brave of them to be using these in combat. There's another sort of deeper level to this, I think, which is that firearms aren't just practicality. You know, they're not even in a factory-produced sense. There are stylistic elements. There's personal preference. That something's got to, you know, it's in the British Army kind of scenario. It's the is it Gucci thing? You know, is it cool? Is it something I have an affinity for? And that's true across all cultures and times. And so if you literally cannot get a functioning firearm, well, A, you might feel that you have to defend yourself with a firearm. You really feel like you need, in theory, the longer reach that gives over more traditional weapons. But also, there's the idea of a gun being almost as important as the practicality. Libya 2011, I watched Sky News and I saw a fighter, whatever you'd like to call him, being filmed by the news crew with some other guys with actual firearms, and a mortar round comes in and the camera goes all over the place. This guy, well, he drops his gun as he is running. He runs back into the danger zone, because there are still rounds coming in, to retrieve this weapon, and what it turns out to be is a toy gun. So he's trying to participate in this action with people who have been able to get hold of real guns. He's so sure that he has to be there doing his part that he's doing it with a gun that does literally nothing. A broom handle with a knife attached to the end of it would have been a far superior weapon. There's something about this idea of a firearm that appeals in certain circumstances, in extremis essentially. And that's the situation that the Mau Mau found themselves in, up against the British Empire. Thanks for watching, guys. If you'd like to see a little bit more behind the scenes with these videos, you can head over to TikTok, where we now have an active channel. So do check us out there. Otherwise, the usual things apply. We have 3 museums you can visit if you're in the UK. We have our website that you can look at. Especially keep an eye on the events programme, because there might be something coming up in the next month or so that you might like to come and check out at one of our sites. But whatever you do, join us here again next week.